Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Small Steps, Big Change with Jim Sinur. I'm Ellie Stutz, Head of Knowledge and Collaboration for PNMsoft. We've got an incredible webinar for you today. How can you achieve an agile enterprise in the era of big change? To answer that question, we have the honor of hosting leading BPM authority, Jim Sinur. Jim is a highly experienced analyst in the fields of business process, analytics, and cognitive computing. We also have on board with us PNMsoft CEO Gal Horvitz and CTO James Luxford. Today's agenda will include a fresh look at change from an industry standpoint, introducing the concept of small steps, big change, Q&A with Jim and Gal, and James's demo of our IBPMS software, PNMsoft Sequence. Now, before we start off, I'd like to introduce a quick poll for you, the audience. The poll question is, what is the biggest obstacle to change? And I'll launch that right now. And we'll give you a few minutes to enter your answers into the poll widget. So just vote for that. Take a moment to think about it. And this is obviously a critical question for this webinar. Now, during this webinar, I also encourage you to enter your questions for our panelists, for Jim, Gal, and James, in the GoToWebinar questions widget. Jim and Gal will be happy to take your questions towards the end of the webinar. I also encourage you to find out more about our intelligent BPM software sequence at pnmsoft.com, and you can also watch all of our recorded webinars there on pnmsoft.com. Okay, we'll give you a couple more moments to enter your votes. Okay, and closing the poll in 5 seconds. Okay, I'll just share with you the answers of that poll. Okay, looks like people's aversion to change winning with 76%, that being, in your opinion, the biggest obstacle to change, and 72% of you voted, so thank you very much. Okay, let's get started then. A moment. And I will, without further ado, give the floor over to our very special guest, Jim Sinur.
Thanks, Ellie. I really appreciate it. The key thing about process is that it's a very well-proven investment. I've been involved with, IT business relationships for a number of years. I'm sold, I don't want to admit how many, but I've had 25 plus years of delivery in the real world and 20 plus as an analyst. And this is the most exciting area I've ever worked in because the benefits keep coming. Now, that's a good thing, but it's also a challenge that you've set expectations that the benefits are still going to come, whether it's revenue, cost containment, time to market, innovation, visibility, accountability, or adaptability. That's what management is going to expect. But process is a lot bigger than people give it credit for. It really can change the way organizations can compete. And as we move to the digital platform over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have to plug into these big issues. The big issues, of course, engender some form of transformation. These are big changes that management wants, and these changes are infrastructural and they're also real-time. So we'll have to instrument our processes to handle on-the-fly goal adjustments. At the same time, we'll have to incrementally build that new world. So we have a challenge, but process is up to the task. So processes can really help organizations cope with big change, and it's coming, like it or not. We're fighting for new pocketbooks and customer loyalty and new revenue. I'm seeing people use process to what we call in the business sheep steal a customer away. And we're seeing a lot of the early mobile experiences aimed at setting up new accounts in a real new way, in a way that appeals to the younger generation, because that's where the money is shifting. And also, it's, we want to speed up the way things are going. Not only changes, but things that are happening in nanoseconds, and linking the Internet of Things with our business processes. We also see the notion of upstarts in many industries. You can think of all kinds of examples of upstart. Uber in the taxi business, Amazon in the retail. I mean, they were an upstart. There's going to be more upstarts. And so, if you're not differentiating yourself significantly, you're going to have a problem, maintaining customer loyalty. That's the highest cost in a company, is gaining and maintaining a customer. And so having that differentiation is important. So you have to fight. And that means processes will be able to help you deliver a combination of benefits. And these are some pictures of case studies that I've used in the past. The first one is, on the left-hand corner is the retail experience, and the right-hand upper right is health management, proactive health management. The one in the lower left is around surgery center management and optimization, where everything's tagged. And the lower right is basically Heathrow Airport. And, using processes to deliver a myriad of benefits is where people are going. Process is also expected to change the way IT is perceived. IT has been always perceived in the past as a utility. And what really business wants is, IT to drive change and become a strategic partner and be outwardly focused, not inwardly focused. Now, that's going to be a journey. Here's an example of what happened with a company that was very fast growing. Two guys got together, James and Bill, ergo Jabil, and they build specialized circuit boards, and their business grew very fast. And if it wasn't for an IBPMS, they wouldn't be able to keep up. And on the far left is where they were. In the middle with the yellow dots is where they are, and on the right is where they want to be. And everybody wants to be that way, and process can help. Process has incredible reach, functionality, speed, and impact, and it can be dynamic. Traditionally, we think of process as not dynamic, but they are. And so they can help optimize and manage your resources. You can embed decisions inside of them, or you can have decisions on the outside affect the rules and the flows dynamically. And you can have signals and patterns that get people's attention, or even detect the signals and patterns inside of the process itself. So processes have a great reach. So this means that we're going to have big change. It's a lot like eating an elephant a bite at a time. And we know BPM can do this. We know it can change incrementally, and we've got examples of that in the banking industry, in the telecom industry, in the insurance industry. But there are a lot of soft things around this particular idea of transformation. You have to look at yourself. You got to pick some principles and goals that you want. You have to pick viable approaches that will work. You have to start in a comfortable on-ramp that works in your particular culture, and you need to deliver bite-sized chunks of benefit-rich capabilities that are leading you to an end game. So in order to know yourself, you have to say, what is my need for big change? What is my existing and target culture? Do I want to turn the baton over to the younger people? Do I want people to be more agile? Do I want people to be aware of my operating plans? You need to take a look at your risk profile. If you're not a risk taker, you may not want to do big change except for over a very long period of time, though I think the competitive environment may change your mind. Look at your change history for hot change. Have you been able to do that? Have you ever tried to transform before? Was there success or failure? I worked on a couple of very large transformation projects in the financial industry, and some of them were easy and some of them were painful, and I would have died to have the kind of BPM tools we have today. So what do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known to be, are you obsessed with your customer? Are you goal-driven? Do you want to seek innovation? Or do you want to do all of these? I mean, you could make a case that you want to, do all of these things simultaneously. And what you have to do is pick which one are the high priority goals and which ones are the medium priority goals. So you also have to pick viable approaches. Do you want to surround legacy and create differentiation? A lot of people want to do that. Some people want explicit policies and rules so they can put more dynamism. They want to leverage these adaptable processes. Maybe you want to start at visibility. Maybe making your desired outcomes with dashboards and leveraging the Hawthorne effect is what you want to do. Maybe you want to, go from reactive to proactive predictive analytics. Maybe you want a global impact with local customizations. Maybe you want to design a people approach to your services. So the key here is to ask these questions, go through the process, and start implementing with small processes. And you might start with a process model. Quite often BPM does. You may start with a system process composition. You may take a bunch of APIs and put them together in a new way, services and APIs together. You may want a role-based workbench. The idea of having a specialty workbench that is, around somebody's job persona is important. You might want to start with successful technology. You might want to start with the user interface or flow. That's a very common one, along with the process model. Some people like to start with data, event patterns, and information to the point where they start from business scenarios and work back down to the patterns that they should recognize. And the notion of visualization of goals is crucial. So here's an example in the agribusiness. They started off by taking little pills that could sense water and fertilizer and have those pills dialed in for the crop type. And so they scattered the pills. The pills would tell the farmers when to water and when to fertilize. Then they said, well, let's take the next step. Let's link these pills to the bots. And the bots are these automatic watering arms. And they leverage liquid fertilizer and water in the proper amount. And that was a reactive approach, but it got better yields. So eventually they said, hey, well, maybe we need to link this to water runoff models in our local area. By the way, this was in Australia where water is extremely scarce. And then they linked it to the Australian national weather modeling system so they could be proactive. So here's a case where they were able to incrementally change the yields to 40% more than what they were getting, and they still hadn't quite determined what perfect fertilizer water mixtures were by plant, but they're sneaking up on it little by little. So this is an example, and we'll talk some more about some examples, but today you need to dig in and learn the power of these new digital capabilities. Social mobile cloud is hot, but there's other things out there that are going to be hot if they're not already. Do a pilot application that would deliver more intelligent incremental processes, and come up with, in the next 45 days, with a transition map to say, well, if the transformation goes perfect, this is where it goes. Now, we're going to move into my favorite part of this session, not just because my stuff's done, but, Gal, who's, the CEO of PNM Soft, has seen a lot. He's worked with a lot of clients, and he's got some sage wisdom on how to go through this transformation. Gal, how are you?
I'm good, Jim. Thanks for having me here.
As the CEO of, one of the, strong IPBMS capabilities, do you have any real customer examples where they're achieving big change by doing small steps? So I gave you some of the theory and a couple of, examples that you could get your hands around, but what are you seeing in the real world?
Yeah, that's a good one, Jim. Well, definitely people seem to stay away nowadays from the big bang approach. I think those days are pretty much over, where you would give a lot of money and a lot of time to a project and patiently wait for a very big promised return. Things change too quickly. People are averse of risk, and they're looking to get much quicker returns. So overall, we do see that people are more open nowadays for the small steps approach, almost with everything. Let's take an example. Take Aon. That's a 66,000 people company or so, leading global provider of insurance and HR services, and well known in some parts of the world as the sponsor of Manchester United. Now, that's a big company, and they have some really big projects going. And we were part of a very ambitious goal that they set a few years ago to transform operations, customer service, and self-service. So that was a very big plan involving lots of people. But I thought that there are people there that were very smart with the approach they've taken. It started really small. Few processes in IT, building some building blocks, some integration to existing systems. So you would say a modest start, but that definitely drove some attention from other parts of the organization, and that enabled them to build some momentum. They trained some more people outside IT in different business units, and they started decentralize the way they developed this project. So IT were not controlling everything. They were preaching that small steps approach to many other people across the organization. And if we fast forward to today, they've got over 2,000 business process applications that were created by about 100 people who came from all across the organization. The majority of them are not IT people. They've been able to create self-service to their customers. They've been able to streamline operation, reduce their cost by many millions a year. So, it took a bit of a time, and they haven't done it on day one, but they've taken this patient, small step approach, introducing more and more value to the organization, and the aggregate value of these 2,000 business processes that were created and improved over time was a huge change. So I think that's a good example.
Well, a kind of a follow-up question here. Can you use the small steps approach with any technology, or does it require something special?
Well, that's a good one as well. I think most of us, if you've been through any software, computer science education, you've been warned about the horrors of the spaghetti code. You have to design everything in advance. Otherwise, you're going to face huge issues with performance and maintenance, etc., etc. Obviously, since then, software has made a lot of progress, but still, not designing, in many cases, would lead to poor performance and poor piece of software. Now, interesting enough, I think BPM is perfectly positioned, because in BPM, the model is the application. You change the model, you change the application. So you don't create that spaghetti code. You don't you don't create risks to your performance and to your maintenance going forward. But even if you have that capability in your technology, and by the way, it's not just BPM, but BPM is maybe one of the best examples. But what about the need to stop your production every time you want to introduce a new change? Take a company like Amazon. I recently read that Amazon introduced a change to one of their production systems every 10 seconds. Now that's massive. Some companies are fearful of introducing change to their production systems once a year because they have to shut down everything and it takes time and people complain and you never know what's going to happen after you switch these servers down and then you get them up again. So the notion of introducing the change without disrupting what's going on in the organization at that time is also a limitation. So you have to have a technology that A, the model is the application, and B, you can launch changes without stopping production. If you have both these capabilities, the small steps approach could be practiced fairly easily. And if you don't have that, it would be more difficult. I think BPM is maybe the perfect place for that, but some of that may be in existence also outside the BPM world.
So Gal, we saw in the survey that people change is the big issue. Everybody wrestles with it. So what are the main challenges that you see your customers trying to deal with to change their business? And is there any kind of change in the way they work? Leveraging this small steps, big change approach?
So I think, Jim, your previous question touched more on technology. I think this one, from my end, is more to do with human behavior. So a lot of research has been made over the last years on this topic. And I personally specifically like the work of the Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman, on prospect theory. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time today to go into it in detail, but the outcome of many of these studies show that most people are risk averse in some situations and they feel a bit more bullish in others, but when it comes to the kind of business decisions that if you get it wrong, it could, let's say, create a little bit of problems to you, you or most people would, in many cases, put an overweight on the disadvantages of the change and will give underweight to the advantages. So this sort of behavior, which is programmed into our brains, this behavior encourages the status quo, encourages if it's not broken, why fix it? We all know this term. So even people that like to think that they are open to change and they are visionaries with their thinking, the risks, we always tend to give too much weight to the risk. So this is a big issue when you try to introduce a change. Now, technology is actually part of the solution because I don't believe we can reprogram people's mind. What we can do is to take their mindset into account when we plan new software, new technology. And I think if you look around you, the success of lots of things like the iPhone and other big technologies that took over the world was because it took into account what people like and don't like to do. So going back to our challenges around change, if we can allow people to try things before they commit to the change, if we can allow them to roll back if they don't like the change, if we can allow them to make changes in smaller steps and not force them to do sort of a double or nothing sort of a move, all of those sort of little things that take into account human behavior and the mentality around change and risk, that could make it much easier. It would never be easy, but it would be easier. And the good things about people is even if they don't like or are not that happy to change in the first place, once they move to another point, once they change, the same mentality means that they are now happy with their new position, and then they don't want to change back to where they were. So if you do a series of small incremental changes, letting people to get used to this one at a time, and you can do it quite rapidly and frequently, you can achieve quite a lot, taking human behavior into account.
Yeah, it sounds like it can reach a tipping point that way. I've been involved in a number of big change kinds of situations, and you get a lot of resistance, and you get a little bit of success and repeat it over and over again, and all of a sudden it reaches a tipping point and they're pounding down your door to do things. So what is your advice to customers as the next logical steps to take with the technology and, you know, the change approach that you've just talked about?
So obviously there's no point taking modern technologies and applying methodologies or to use it in a way that it's not proper. We have to take into account what the new technology could do, and we have to adjust the way we work with that. So, for example, we all acknowledge that we live in times of uncertainty. I'm not suggesting that if things are not certain, you should not plan. You definitely should plan, but your plan should be planned for a constant need of change. So you have to introduce agility into your plan, and you have to have a plan what you're going to do when something happens. You know, for example, in the construction industry, they have checklists what to do in order to get the high riser up. But what happens if there is a storm? What happens if there's water everywhere and the building is not sealed yet and you have all these nasty surprises? What do you do then? There is no checklist for that. But then they have a checklist for who to call in these situations and which people should get into the same room for the next 24 hours to find a good solution. So some things you can really have a checklist for. In other cases, you could have a checklist for communications, for who should speak with who and when. So if we look back on our change and BPM, my suggestion, my advice overall is to try and go light on the documentation. Don't try to document everything. Don't try to over-design the systems, and don't spend too much time on requirements. Do some effort, obviously, collect the highlights, but spend more time in interactive workshops, business, IT, together, creating prototypes, working prototypes of what you are trying to achieve. A prototype is much easier to understand than a document, and with modern technology, this prototype can be scaled up to a production level systems quite easily. And if you do this iteratively, if you get these workshops going, let's say every week or 2 weeks, like short sprints in Agile, business and IT enhancing their prototypes together, you can create systems that A, would be used by people, and B, you're going to have both the IT and the business people feeling the same ownership. So there won't be that tug of war, there won't be that pushback, that wasn't what I wanted, that wasn't what I planned. And you can get these people to work together and actually achieve much more rapidly. And you know, modern technologies such as our whole change enables exactly that without paying with spaghetti code and performance issues, security issues. So my advice to people is when you go out and you choose some modern technology, make sure that you also apply the modern methodology, be agile, go light on documentation, do stuff more interactive, business IT together. And I believe that working prototypes are probably the best thing to use when trying to build business process applications. So hopefully that was making sense.
Well, yeah, the do it, try it, fix it approach has been very successful for me in my career, and we got a lot of things done that way. So I'm a believer, but you know, other folks got to make it work too, and you're starting to see that, and so am I.
Yep, I agree.
Thanks, Gal. Well, we're going to move into the next stage of the presentation, and we're going to actually see a demo of this. And right now my screen's frozen, so I can't move it on to the next one. There we go. And if you would pass control to James, I'd appreciate it. Sorry, froze up on me.
That's okay.
No problem, Jim. I have control now, so hopefully you'll all be seeing my screen now. So,
Yep.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Gal, for that insight into small steps, big change. I now just want to try and illustrate what we've been talking about with an example and showing you how one of our customers has used small change to actually achieve, small steps to achieve big change. So this example that I'm going to use for the demonstration, it's a service request example. It's for one of our customers that provides IT services to its customers' employees. And historically they used homegrown applications which were hard to maintain, didn't really do the job. So they were looking to make a big change so they could transform their business. But they didn't want to do that in one big step. They've got lots of customers relying on their services. So they wanted an approach where they could get there gradually, where they didn't enforce too much change on their end customers. Didn't want to scare those end customers off. So they decided to use this approach of taking small steps to get there, having clear defined goals of where they wanted to go over what timescales. And they selected sequence kinetics and a hot change architecture to help them go on that journey from where they were previously to where they are now. But before I talk a little bit more about this particular example, I just want to introduce sequence kinetics to you. I'm going to switch to an environment. Very quickly, a very quick look at sequence kinetics. Sequence kinetics is P&M-SOS IBPMS. It's a very user-friendly environment where you can rapidly automate your processes, but the end users can have a very rich user experience. Here's one example of our user experience. This is our SharePoint portal. Very configurable, very adaptable. You can brand it, you can tailor it to meet specific needs of the end users. But of course, not everyone are desk-bound, office-bound. Many people are out there on the road, could be in meetings, but they're not at their laptop. So we have an HTML5 mobile portal that allows you to do all of your tasks, receive notifications, start processes from your smartphone or from your tablet. Again, a very rich environment, highly configurable as well. All this is underpinned by our administration environment that allows us to be able to configure these processes very quickly. And what's key here is it's not about having to write lines of code. Gal mentioned about the spaghetti. It's not about having spaghetti, big spaghetti bowl of code that is hard to maintain. We have a very nice graphical environment that allows you to model the process in a notation that business users understand as well as the process designers, and they can collaborate together to deliver a functionally rich but easy to use business process application. So how did this customer that I'm talking about, how did they use sequence kinetics to take them on this journey of small steps to deliver big change? Well, the way that they did it was by going through a series of fairly quick releases. There was about a month between each of these releases. So from release 0, 1 month, release 1, get the users using it, move on, and so on. And I'm going to walk you through each of those releases and what they brought to the business, what that small step delivered. So release 0, as Jim mentioned, this was about coming up with a viable approach that would get them going. The way that the service was originally delivered to the end users was through a web application, a homegrown web application that had been built, but it wasn't particularly reliable. So users were submitting their requests, but they weren't getting any feedback, any acknowledgement back. So they didn't actually know whether those requests had been received by the service desk, by the delivery teams that were going to do the work. So they were often submitting requests several times, but the service desk didn't know whether they were new requests or the same requests. So there was a real disconnect between the service that was being provided and customer satisfaction. That was the main issue. That was what they wanted to look at first. So the baseline, Release 0, was about replacing that web application with an IBPMS-based application, but keeping it simple. So it started off, the requesters, they could still use channels that they were currently using, which they were mainly, because they didn't like the web application, they weren't using the web application. Therefore, they were phoning, they were emailing the service desk. So let's keep it the same way. Let's let them still use those channels, but have the service desk capturing that information within sequence. So it's captured at the start. Very simply, let's just send an acknowledgement back to the requester. Just let them know, yes, we have received your request. This is when you can expect a response by. Give them that warm feel that they are loved. But also sending an email to the delivery team's mailbox to let them know they have a job to do. Not worrying about, well, how are we going to track those requests, how are we going to make sure they happen, how are we going to distribute the work amongst the team. That was for later. This was just about getting over that initial issue that the end customer had with not trusting the system. So they went live with Release 0, users were using it, very successful. They didn't want to stand still, they wanted to move on quickly. So Release 1, and here I'm identifying where we've made the changes with little comments within our canvas. So here, this was about implementing the delivery team task. This was about letting the delivery team, rather than just receive an email in a shared mailbox, quite a traditional approach, they received within a sequence queue all the requests that were coming in. They could distribute the work accordingly, whether it's by skills, speciality, availability, and they could measure, they could monitor to make sure each of those requests were happening in time. But that was a small change, especially for the end user. The end user wasn't aware that there had been a change. They would just carry on submitting requests by phoning up, emailing in. Again, a small step, but delivered some real value because that really decreased the length of time that it was taking because we are able to monitor all of the requests that were coming in. But still wanting to move forward. If we're still relying on the service desk taking the calls, receiving the emails, that's not the most effective way, the most productive way of doing it. Let's provide a self-service solution to the end users, but a self-service solution that works for them. So we moved the submit request step from the service desk swim lane to the requester, exposed it in a front-end portal that allowed them to submit their request, but allowed them to track those requests as well. They still received their acknowledgement to know it's been received, but they could track exactly where it was. But also we automated the email channel as well. People like to send emails, and we were using our email listeners to pick those emails up and kick the process off automatically. So again, make it more efficient, which meant we really relieved the workload on the service desk. The service desk could just then answer queries when they come in, managing by exception rather than by the rule. So that was Release 2. Again, small changes, but delivering real benefit to the end users. Release 3. What was happening before, the delivery team, before they could go ahead and process a request, they needed to go back to the customer and to a manager of the request and get approval. That was all done by email. That was handled outside of initially the web application and up to Release 2 outside of the sequence business process application. but we wanted to get that in there so that we could automate that part and also have full auditability. So we introduced a new set of stakeholders that were involved in the process, and the appropriate approver would use the organization hierarchy held in Active Directory. We'd know who we needed to send the approval to, we'd send the approval to them. They would give their approval or reject it, and accordingly we would either send a rejection notification back to the requester or we would go ahead and process it. This really helped to reduce the human latency that you can have in some processes where it's not fully automated. That's release 3. Finally, release 4. With release 4, we've been focusing on, up to release 4, we've been focusing on how can we help get things moving, get it to the point where we can process the request. But lots of these requests, they were being actioned manually. Active Directory, password resets, creating new accounts, creating workloads, ordering kit, ordering a mouse, ordering a new Office license. Lots of these processes, or lots of these requests could actually be automated. So what we did, we have created some automation that allows us through integration with the various systems, whether it's SAP, whether it's with Active Directory, allows those to be automated. And we only need to touch the delivery team for the ones that can't be automated. It was about 30% of the requests that were coming in could be automated, but those 30% typically took of the order of 70 to 80% of the delivery team's time because they were quite manually intensive. So by automating this, that did two things. First of all, as soon as it had been approved, and in fact some tasks didn't necessarily need to be approved, that was job done. It could be actioned straight away. It really reduced the timescales down. But it also meant that the numbers on the delivery team, some of that team could be reassigned to other more worthwhile tasks. So it really freed up lots of resources. That had cost implications for both the supplier and the customer. Everyone was benefiting, and more importantly, the end users were getting a better service. So that was release 4. They have continued improving the process going forward, small steps, but they've gone from a very unsatisfactory situation to where they're now having a good service being provided quickly, efficiently. And to indicate that, we have some dashboards here from the environment where we can see, not over time, but over the release cycle, we can see how the volumes have increased. That's because they were bringing on more teams. Now, even though volumes are increasing, the average time and the delivery teams weren't being increased to cope with the increased volumes. The average times were coming down quite significantly, down from in excess of 15 hours, that's almost almost 2 working days, all the way down to half a day. And that meant that the SLAs that were being closely monitored were being met at a much greater rate. But probably most important, the customer satisfaction was even lower than this. The release 0, it was at about 40% there, maximum being 100. Before it was automated, it was even lower. After release 4, it was up in the high 80s, heading towards the 90s. So we've saved costs. We have improved the service. We have improved customer satisfaction. So all round, it was a very successful project. If we'd have tried to take a big bang approach, would it have gone as smoothly? Almost certainly not. By having increments, small steps, we could see, well, what's the next best thing to introduce? What's going to deliver the most benefit? So we could implement those small changes, small steps, but we got a big change out in a relatively short space of time. Okay, so that's enough from me. I shall pass back to Ellie, and hopefully there have been lots of questions.
Okay, well, I thank you very much, James, and we'll stay on your screen for a second as I just ask people to enter their questions into the GoToWebinar widget. We have a couple questions already, and I'll just give you a moment to ask any questions either to Jim or to Gal or to James whether it be a little more on the technological or business end, or please, this is the time to do so, and we'll just take some of those until we wrap up the webinar. Okay, so first question, Gal, do you see sequence technology having the power to actually change the way people work? That's a question to you, Gal.
I believe so. I think the way people work is quite a big term. The way people work is what they do and how much time it takes them to do, and what they feel about it, how they feel at the end of the day, what's the outcome. So if we look at the, and I like to look by result, the outcome, I think that what we all try to do in business is to get our outputs higher and higher. And I think sequence enables us to do that, because sequence can very quickly learn from what people like to do and people don't like to do. It's very easy to improve things over time quite rapidly, and nobody gets everything right the first time. It's very hard. You learn by experience, and it's all about the feedback. If you could create a working environment that gives the users everything they need, and if you can then improve this working environment further and further to match changes that they've got or improvements that they want to make, I think the employees or the customers would trust the system, would trust the technology, would do more with the technology, and it will transform the way they work. Yes.
Okay, great. We have a question from Michal. Can you introduce modifications to ongoing processes? Maybe James, do you want to field that one? Either James or Gal, I guess. James, can you make modifications to ongoing processes?
So sequence kinetics, it has hot change architecture. This means we have a declarative definition of the process. We're not having to compile code in order to run the processes. And what this means is we can, if we're making a change, as you saw in the demonstration, we actually deploy those changes as new versions. Anything currently running in the older versions, the older releases, would carry on to completion, and anything new kicked off would start with the new version of the template. But say we wanted to make a change to back on release 1. We've still got some cases running here. We can make changes on those templates. The declarative architecture allows us to make those changes, and those changes will be adopted by those in-flight process instances. It's one of the real advantages of hot change.
Okay, a follow-up question to that, James, from Nelson, is asking, is it possible to migrate instances from releases? For example, migrating instances from release 1 to release 2.
In so much as, yes, you can have release 1 become release 2 of the process, then yes.
Okay. And here's a question for Jim. Jim, are some changes more important than others? And if so, how do you choose?
Well, yeah, that's always the difficult one. I find what has worked for me in the past is if an organization has some form of governance board, and you can visualize the changes and their impact to that governance board to show what their impact is, what their benefit is, what the time to do them is, what the risk motivators are, really helps that. And there are tools that will help you visualize that. Now, let's say you don't have a governance board, you're not that lucky, and that happens sometimes. Then you look at the operational plans of each of the divisions of your organization, and having the operational plans in your hand really help you cope with picking priorities. And that was the essence of this question, as I understand it. So let's say you don't have a governance board, you don't have operating plans, then you have to find an influencer in the company, whether that's in a visionary, that's at a department head level, You know, ideally you'd have a visionary at the executive level, but it doesn't always happen that way. So pragmatically, you move downstream again and you say, well, I don't really have a visionary department head. Then you go for a department head who has a great reputation. So let's say somebody's really a good COO or somebody's a good CMO. You look for the stars to attach your logic to when you make these decisions. Now that's more of a strategic and tactical approach. So let's say you have projects that, you know, have much more of an immediate impact, like rule changes, etc. In some cases, you can run simulations. And so some organizations have run simulations that say, well, what if we do this? How is this going to impact our business output? So the idea of combining, let's say, the process is in production, some process mining with optimization, with simulation, you can make some pretty data-driven, fact-based decisions as what you ought to do. So, you know, it depends whether it's strategic versus operational versus tactical, but that was kind of a top-down pecking order list that I use myself.
Okay, great. We'll take one more question from Bernardo. He's asking, how should I communicate to business users the changes of each release? And do you have some examples? Maybe we'll go to James for that one. James?
Okay, so and the change management is one of the most important aspects of any business process automation project. It really depends who those end users are, but we find by having what's worked particularly well, and it worked in this case, was having a steering committee, a set of super users who represented each area of the business, and they were fully engaged in defining the application up front, but then also defining, well, what are those small steps going to be? What's going to benefit each area of the business the most? So and they would agree what those steps would be, and then they would take on the responsibility of feeding back to their group of users what the next set of changes were going to be. So devolving that communication down, rather than having it come from on high. These members of the steering committee, they were trusted advisors within the business, and they would communicate out to the business. So it's best to try and filter it down as much as possible, but having the people that are communicating the change fully bought into what that change is going to deliver, why it's being implemented, what's the reason behind it, what benefits is it going to deliver, and what impact is it going to have on each of the users.
Okay, great. Okay, well, folks, that wraps it up. I'd like to extend a really big thank you to, a big change thank you to Jim Sinur, our very special guest with us today, to Gal Horowitz, and to you, James Luxford, PNM Soft. You can watch this webinar. It will be up at pnmsoft.com by tomorrow morning, and we have all our on-demand webinars there, pnmsoft.com, under resources at the top. And if you're interested in seeing a demo of PNMsoft Sequence for your organization, if you'd like to start your small steps towards a big change, then you can also request a demo at pnmsoft.com. And if you can contact us directly at info@pnmsoft.com. On behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. We actually have a webinar coming up on March 26th. That's going to be about how to leverage your Microsoft investment with BPM software. So please join us for that, and more details to follow. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a great day.